Hi everyone, Matt, back with another update, and really it's going to be a preview for another video series that I've done on my other channel, the Porchlight, which I will link at the end of this video. It's a two-part series that's just really going to provide a larger update for basically where we're at on this roadmap that God has been plotting leading up to his return. For all of us who are looking for the return of Jesus Christ, this will be a pretty substantial update. At least the video set that is linked at the end. But this video, I just wanted to provide kind of a preview about what's going to be covered in that. Essentially, we're still here. November 18th and 19th was the time that we were potentially looking at as a high watch period for the Lord's return. It was one of the major markers or milestones that God had plotted for us and shown in various ways in Scripture and also in creation as being connected to his return. And obviously, it wasn't the day of his return, but it was an important day nonetheless. It was the anniversary for the end of the flood, and we're going to see really as I get into the other video update and look at that. What God has now shown is that 2025 echoes. This is kind of hinted at through one of the real-world aids that God provided, which I've covered in the past, which is that this elaborate fishing story that God has made in the earth, and it corresponds with constellations in the sky above. But in this picture story that God has essentially laid out, the end of the fishing rod or the reel corresponded with the location of the constellation of the shield. And that's important because the word shield occurs 45 times in 44 verses in the Bible. And 45 is 20 plus 25. It's one of the ways that God will often codify or encode the year 2025. Furthermore, where this point on the earth intersects is next to Interstate 84, which is important because 84 is one of the ways that God will represent the two 2022s in a sequence of the end. 84 is 2 times 42, and then obviously 42 is 20 plus 22, and so it's a way to represent two 2022s. And I've covered that in the past. If that concept is new to you, I recommend watching some of the previous videos and studies that have covered that topic. But essentially, I'll sum up really quick. 2022 was the initial appointed time for the Lord's return. However, the bridegroom tarried, which is what Scripture lets us know of in many places throughout. And one of the reasons the Lord tarried was due to the flood, and there's other matters as well. But basically, there are several accountings or reckonings of time that have to be balanced on the scales of time before the Lord returns. And until that point, the Lord tarries. And so 2022, specifically the anniversary for the start of the flood in 2022, was the initial appointed time that the Lord would essentially begin to tarry at. However, because God will arrive on time, he's essentially going to reset his clock. That event is what is concealed in the seven thunders in Revelation chapter 10. And it's hinted at and cross-referenced in many other places in Scripture, and God has provided many real-world typological aids to relate to that as well. But anyway, so this picture story that God has created in the earth connects to Interstate 84 in the town of Echo, Oregon. But then, and it's even at 45 degrees latitude, 45 minutes north. And so even by its actual location on the earth, God's given some clues about what year it's linked to. However, if you go to Psalms 84, the word shield actually occurs twice, which, in retrospect, I think was a clue that God was providing us that 2025 occurs twice, or there's two reckonings of it. And so indeed the end, as we see in the volume of the book, which I've studied in the past, is connected to Heshvan 27, and it is connected to 2025 still. But very much like the two 2022s of the end, God has now really shown that there are also two 2025s of the end. And however, the way that overlaps is a little bit different. And again, I'll cover that more in the other video set that I will link. But basically, if you go from Echo, Oregon, and you follow Interstate 84 to its endpoint, it actually ends in another town called Echo in Echo, Utah. And so God was showing that it basically goes from one echo to another echo. And that if you look at where that echo is located, you can compare it to the constellations and these counterparts. It basically would correspond with the scales, and God requires all the scales, again, of time to be balanced. And one of the details that I wasn't aware of prior to November is that Utah actually was the 45th state. And so you have 45 represented at one end, and the end of Interstate 84 in the Echo, Utah, is in the 45th state. And again, 45 is 20 plus 25. So that's another conceptual way God is representing that there are two 2025s at the end. And I believe God has now really shown where that echo of 2025, that second iteration, really resides. I'm not going to get into that now. And one of the reasons I don't want to get into that quite yet, and save it for the other videos, is because I kind of want to build up to it, because it's a pretty substantial modification in the roadmap. And so one thing I could think of it just as people who like visual metaphors, if you could think of like an ant walking on like a piece of paper towards the edge of the piece of paper, following a line. That line's like a timeline. You get to the end, you think you're at the end, but then you realize that it actually goes underneath. You have to walk back in the opposite direction on the underside to get back to where you started. And that's kind of what's happening in a very abstract or conceptual sense with this timeline of the end and the two 2025s. And so, and because of that, where that second 2025 resides, it's a little bit further out than some of these other updates that God has shown in the past. And so for some, just as it was for me, when these new revelations came to light and God presented them, it was bittersweet, because on one hand it's very, it's sweet in the sense that there's more time for our loved ones, more time for the lost to be saved. But it's bitter in the sense that for those of us who long to be with the Lord, we're realizing yet again we have to wait a while longer before he receives us, before we come into his presence. And so in that sense, it could potentially be a bitter pill, at least at first. But again, we remember that God works all things for good for those who love him. And so we just move in that faith and that hope that God is going to bring a greater good in his forbearance and also that's going to work in us long suffering patience. This was actually a topic that came up in a Bible study group that I joined not too long ago, and one of the recent topics was patience, and really seeing patience more not as just sitting still, but like you're basically running a marathon. And so and a marathon requires endurance, and so really patience requires endurance and long suffering. And we grow closer to Christ as we also share and participate in his sufferings. And so there's still obviously areas of growth that the Lord wants in his bride and his church before he comes. And so in the very least, the other message set that I'm gonna link, that again, it's not gonna be on this channel, it's gonna be on my other channel, which is called the Porchlight. But that video series is going to kind of cover a lot more foundation and get into a lot more details regarding what God is showing. There's just some amazing aids that God provided once again, and obviously some incredible treasures in Scripture that God has revealed. And then maybe, again, this is up to God's timing, but maybe about a month or so later, I'm going to finally get to share some of the other content that I had been sitting on for a while. Again, now that I can see that kind of the context for it, it'll make more sense. There's a lot of new things that will be shared there that will kind of just add even more resolution to this timeline and this roadmap that God has been sharing. So again, my goal is to kind of provide a preview and a quick overview of what's going to be covered in those other videos, and kind of direct attention to the other ministry, to the Porchlight. I'll still probably do updates on this channel, but I'm trying to shift a lot of the traffic, if you will, to the other channel, to the Porchlight, because I really do believe that's what God intends to grow and to use going forward. So with that, I hope you guys will go to the other videos and check them out. And if this is been a tough walk for many of you, which I know it probably has been. I just pray that you'd be encouraged that, the Lord is faithful with his promises, even if we don't, understand them at the time. If, we see in part, we prophesy in part, and very often we have to just wait on the Lord in patience, and just knowing his goodness, his character, and his long suffering patience, not just for others, but for us. And so with that, I pray that you guys have a blessed day, and I will talk to you guys later.